Hello, good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you very much for joining our next installment of Career Training USA's professional development webinars. If you are new to InterExchange or maybe new to these webinars, we are a nonprofit organization that promotes cross-cultural awareness through work and volunteer exchange programs here in the US and abroad. The Career Training Department specifically deals with internship and training programs here in the United States. And we've been doing these webinars throughout the COVID-19 pandemic in the hopes of providing resources to current and future exchange visitors. We do want to help you prepare for an internship abroad. We're hoping you'll be able to come in the very near future. So we hope these are helpful to help you prepare for that. Before I go too far, I do want to introduce my colleague who is on the line with me. Tammin Nicholson is the manager of the Career Training Department, and Tammin will be monitoring the chat box throughout the presentation to see if we have any questions that come in. And I do have pauses throughout the presentation where I will stop and try to answer some of those questions. So if you think of any as I'm speaking, please feel free to type those in the chat box, and then hopefully we'll be able to get to those. I do also want to make sure that the technology is working properly. So Tammin, can you see the second slide, the About InterExchange screen?
Yes, I can. You're good to go.
Great. Okay, so to start, I do want to give you an outline of today's session. As you know, we're going to talk about English in the US workplace. That is a pretty broad topic. So there were a lot of things that we could be talking about right now, but we do want to give you kind of a general overview of maybe some of the basic terms and also some of the cultural norms and etiquettes that you should expect and be aware of when you come to the United States to do an internship. So we're going to start with just a brief company overview. We'll talk about socializing with your coworkers and ways that you can do that. And then we'll move on to speaking on the phone and writing emails. And then we'll end today with some professional idioms. If you don't know what an idiom is right now, don't worry, we will definitely define that once we get to those slides and talk more about them. So to start with our company overview, if it's your first day at your new internship, a term that you'll want to be familiar with right away is onboarding. So onboarding is the process of getting a new employee set up to work for the company. So you'll most likely hear this word the first day or two at your internship, as this is when you'll be onboarded. That just means that the company may give you all of the tax paperwork that you need to fill out, that they'll make sure your physical workspace is set up so that you have a computer and maybe an email address. So anything that needs to be done before you can actually begin working is onboarding. Below this on this slide, we have outlined various departments that may be in your company. If you're coming to intern with a large corporation, they most likely will have every one of these departments. So these are pretty broad general departments that you can expect to be in a lot of large companies. But do remember that if you're coming to a small company, so maybe it's a brand new startup or maybe just a family company, and maybe there's only 10 employees, your supervisor might fill all or one of these roles. So it really depends on where you're interning, how many and what type of departments your company will have. I do want to pause and highlight HR and IT. So these are acronyms. So acronyms are words or names that are formed using the first letter of a longer name or phrase. So HR stands for Human Resources, IT stands for Information Technology. And there are a lot of acronyms in the business world in English, and it can make it a bit confusing if you don't know what the longer name or word is. Sometimes each industry will have their own acronyms that they use, and each company might also have specific acronyms that only those who work in the company understand. So if you don't know what an acronym is, don't worry. You should feel free to ask your coworker or supervisor to explain more in depth what they're talking about, what the acronym stands for, because you can expect to run across these. So moving on to some HR terms. So these are some other terms that you might want to know early on as an employee. If you see here, we have PTO, which is another acronym that does stand for paid time off. So you'll just want to talk to your supervisor and find out, what sick days you're eligible for, what time off you're eligible for, and how you can request those. And then if we look at team building, these are activities that are meant to improve the relations between individual employees and try to help you all work better together. I want to highlight team building because we do highly recommend that you join any team building or any office sponsored activities that your company may offer. This is a great way of learning American culture kind of through a more social setting, as well as sharing your own culture with your coworkers. So it'll help you work better as a team, but it also will help you throughout your program to be immersed more in the culture. We have had past participants say that they tried to say yes to as many social activities or team building activities that were offered, and those were some of their favorite parts of the program. So you'll certainly want to join any of those that you're able to do. And then I do want to jump down here to performance review. We listed this as you might hear about it from your coworkers, as this is something that they may go through maybe at the beginning of a year or at the end of a year. But do keep in mind or remember that as a J1 intern or trainee, you will be evaluated according to the methods outlined in your training plan. So those methods might differ slightly from the regular employees in your company who might go through a performance review, which you won't necessarily need to go through yourself. So if you do join some of those team building activities, how can you socialize with your coworkers? So socializing with your coworkers are often, these types of conversations are often called water cooler conversations. So these are casual discussions between coworkers about non-work related topics. And if you see in this photo here, we have a group of coworkers around the water cooler, taking a break, getting some water, chatting. So that's what water cooler conversations refers to. When back in the day, people would surround themselves around the water cooler during their break to chat with their coworkers. These days, if you hear water cooler conversations, it's just referencing office talk, maybe office gossip. It doesn't necessarily need to happen near the water cooler any longer. They can happen anywhere, but that's just kind of how it started. So any in-office conversations you have that aren't about work would be called water cooler or water cooler conversations. So what do water cooler conversations look like? They do involve a lot of small talk. So small talk is polite, unimportant conversation in a social setting. So something you'll want to remember is that Americans love small talk. You can have small talk with strangers to fill an awkward silence, maybe while you're riding an elevator or waiting for the bus. Or you can also have small talk with casual acquaintances or coworkers. So it's not uncommon for coworkers to say hello to each other in the morning, even if you don't know each other well. So maybe it's someone who works in a different department, you see them in the hallway in the morning, it would be considered polite to say hello, good morning when you see them. They may even ask, hello, how are you? But Americans, we don't always expect an answer to the question, how are you? We use it as a greeting. So your coworker might say, good morning, how are you? And then keep walking. They're not expecting a full response to that question. They don't need to know how crazy your morning was. They're just being polite and saying hello. So you should definitely say hello back. So when you do have conversations with your coworkers, we've listed some ideas of topics you can discuss. This is probably true in your country as well, but sports is a big topic to speak about. Americans like basketball a lot, maybe baseball, American football. I would say those are some of the three top sports that we would talk about. They may not know as much about soccer, but if that's something you're interested in, or there's a different sport that you're really interested in your home country, your coworkers would certainly be happy to learn about that and hear about the sports that you like to watch. So sports are always a good option. You could also talk about weekend or vacation plans. So maybe it's a Friday afternoon. You might ask your coworker, what are you doing this weekend? That's a great way to generate some more conversation with coworkers if you want to bond with them a bit more. Probably the same where you're from as well, but talking about television or movies, those are great topics. Here in the US, everyone wants to know what you're watching on Netflix these days. So you can ask your coworkers about that, or maybe get recommendations for other shows that you might be interested in. And maybe since you're new to the area, you want to know where to eat lunch, what good restaurants your coworkers go to. So you might ask them about their favorite lunch spot or where they go to eat after work as well. And then weather is a big one. You'll find yourself talking about the weather quite often, especially with strangers. So you might be waiting for the bus and someone who's standing next to you might say, wow, I can't believe it's so cold today, or wow, it's really raining. So weather is something that's pretty universal, and that is everyone's going to speak about quite frequently. The main thing to remember about small talk is that it isn't meant to be controversial. So you do want to make sure to keep your topics light and casual. Americans value their privacy, especially at the office. So it will definitely depend on your own company's office culture and your personal relationship with the employees or the coworkers that you're speaking with. But generally, it's not considered appropriate to ask a coworker about their age, their weight, their politics, or other personal matters. So again, you're going to have to judge the situation, but early on, you're going to want to be more casual, more light, and not ask too many personal questions as that's not considered appropriate, especially at the office. So I know we've only gone a few slides in, but I do want to pause and see if we had any questions come in just about those first few slides. Tamin, have there been any?
Yes, Abby, we actually have two questions that have come in so far. So the first question is, which acronyms can we expect our host organization to use?
Yeah, great. So it's going to be a little difficult to know which exact acronyms you can expect your host employer to use, since sometimes, as I mentioned, it's very specific to each company, and it wouldn't make sense for you to know right away what acronyms they're using if only those who are already working there know those specific acronyms. But you can do a little bit of research before you come. So say you're an architecture student, you can research, common architecture acronyms or common acronyms used in architecture. And those might pull up some acronyms, that are just pretty universal for all of the industry. Again, maybe you're in accounting. You can look up typical accounting acronyms to kind of get a better sense of what you can expect when you come for your internship.
Great, thanks, Abby. And before I ask the second question, we have a couple of comments about notes and the content in the slides. So I just want to let everyone know that you will get a copy of this presentation. So if you are making notes or if you'd like to see the text, we're going to send that to everyone as soon as the presentation is over. But the second question that has come in is about team building. And what are some team building activities that we can expect our host company to offer?
So this will really depend on the company. Some companies might be able to offer maybe outings, such as a baseball game or a company picnic, but this isn't possible for all companies. So they may do something a little bit more low key. So maybe you can expect your company to do a small gathering for a coworker's birthday, or maybe you'll do an in-office holiday celebration for Christmas or Halloween or Thanksgiving. Some offices like to do potlucks. So that's just kind of a party where everyone brings a dish from home and then you share. So you get dishes from everyone can come and take a little bit from each dish and you have quite a lot of food. So that's a popular Thanksgiving in office celebration that a lot of companies might do. But again, you should be prepared for anything. And if your company is offering it, we definitely recommend that you join if you're able.
Excellent.
Okay,
That looks like all the questions for now.
okay, perfect. So let's move on then. We'll go ahead and talk about speaking on the phone. So it's normal to be nervous about answering this phone, especially if English isn't your first language. The main thing you want to remember about speaking on the phone is that it's important to be extra polite since people can't read your body language. This can lead to a lot of miscommunication, so you want to make sure to be as clear and polite as possible, especially when you're speaking to customers. So if you do have to answer the phone, your company might have a standard greeting that they want everyone to use, but I have listed a couple of examples here. The main thing you want to remember is that you'll most likely want to state your name and then maybe also your company's name when you're answering the phone. But again, they might give you a standard greeting that everyone uses, and that would be the way you would answer. So after you've answered the phone, the customer has asked their question. Here are some common responses you can expect to use for maybe some common questions. Again, it's important to be polite. So if you look at the second example, if you want someone to tell you their name, you're going to want to say the question, may I ask who's calling? You'll say that instead of something like, who are you? Who are you? Stated just like that could come across as rude, especially since the person can't read your body language. So you want to be very formal when you're speaking on the phone. If you want someone to tell you their name, you're going to want to say, may I ask who's calling? That's the most polite way to ask for someone's name. Another example of being extra polite. If you look down near the bottom, the second to the last question says, can you please hold? So if you need to put someone on hold, you want to ask them nicely, can you please hold? Or would you mind holding, please? You don't want to say, wait one sec. Wait one sec, again, sounds unprofessional. It doesn't sound very polite. So you want to be more formal when you're speaking to customers, especially. Also, if you're putting someone on hold, you'll want to make sure to push the actual hold button and don't just hold the phone by your ear because then the person on the phone can hear what you're saying. Again, that doesn't sound very professional if they can hear you asking a question in the background. So make sure to hit the hold button so that way they don't hear any questions that you're asking your coworker. Okay, so let's move on to some email terms. You'll find yourself writing and receiving a lot of emails, and it does sort of have its own culture in the business world. Much like speaking on the phone, it's typically better to be polite and formal in your emails to avoid any misinterpretation or misunderstanding. So we've highlighted some email terms here. You can see that we have two more acronyms, so CC and BCC. Using the CC line can be very useful and save time, but you definitely want to be careful how you're using it. So CCing someone's manager, for example, could come across as rude or aggressive, especially if you've been waiting on a response from a coworker and they haven't been getting back to you. If you decide to copy their manager on your response to them to follow up again, again, that could come across as very rude and isn't a good way to build relationships with your coworkers. So you want to think very carefully about who you're writing the email to and who you're copying. This is especially true with BCC, with blind carbon copy. Typically, you should really only use BCC if you're sending out a mass email to many people. And there are privacy concerns. So you don't want everyone to get everyone else's email addresses. So you would put everyone in the BCC line, so that way everyone's email remains private. But again, don't BCC someone's manager. That comes across as very aggressive, and your coworker most likely won't like you after that. So you want to think very carefully about who you're including in emails. And then when should you reply and when should you reply all? So often it's better to reply all if you want everyone who's copied to have the information in your answer. Maybe the only time you would think about replying instead of replying all is if you're the recipient of a group message asking you to RSVP to a meeting or an event. Typically, in that case, you would want to reply so that only the organizer gets your response. If you reply all, then everyone who was on that email will get your yes, I'm coming or no, I'm not coming. And then that would put a lot of excessive emails into everyone else's inbox that they don't need to see. You just want your reply to go directly to the organizer. So it can be a little bit tricky with email, but you just want to make sure to pause before you hit send and think about who's copied, who you're replying to. Just make sure to judge each situation carefully to kind of determine what your best options are, who you're including, and how you're replying. We have a few more email terms here that will help you understand and send some emails. The main thing I want to highlight is that if you are added to an email in the middle of a conversation, you do want to make sure to go back and read the entire email chain before you respond. You don't want to actually accidentally ask a question that was maybe already answered in an earlier email and an earlier response. So definitely make sure to read the whole conversation, the whole email thread, before you contribute to the conversation. The email signature is different than when you just sign your name. Email signature is usually added automatically, and that's where you can include your name and your contact information. I will have an example in a couple of slides that will show you kind of what the email signature can look like. And then if we jump down to spam, most email clients like Gmail will have filters that will automatically send unwanted emails, unasked for emails to your spam folder. Generally, this is good so it doesn't clutter your inbox, but sometimes these filters do get it wrong and they might send an email that you actually want to your spam folder. So sometimes it's important or it's a good idea to go through and check your spam folder semi-regularly so that you can see if you missed any emails that might have been important. But do be careful when you're clicking through your spam folder, as you don't want to fall for a phishing email. So phishing is an attempt by criminals to get information from you by pretending to be someone else. So these can be really tricky. Your company might ask you to go through technology training when you first start your internship so that you can learn how to avoid some of these phishing emails. It's mostly just, again, being careful, taking a beat before you respond or open anything to make sure that it's a trusted email. Okay, so let's talk about writing an email. What does an email structure look like? Typically, an email will start with a greeting, then it will have an opening line, then you would move to your body of your email. So all of the information you're going to provide, the reason that you're writing the email. After that, you would have your closing line and then a closing greeting. So the formality of your email will depend on who you're emailing. If you're writing a client or a customer, you're going to want to be more formal. So if we look at the greeting, the first one listed there, Dear Dr. Miller, that is the most formal greeting. So that would be something you would write to a customer. Hello, Miss Gray, slightly more casual, but Miss Gray is, again, fairly formal. So you could maybe use this for a customer that you've worked with in the past. Hi, Tom, that is the most casual. So you might use that with a coworker. If you're sending them a brief check-in email or a brief update, you could say, hi, Tom. How would you open your email? So you might just tell the recipient why you're writing. So you could start with, I'm writing with an update on our project. Maybe you want to thank them for the email or for responding to your email. You might say, thanks for getting back to me. Or you can open with a little bit of small talk. So you can have small talk in emails as well. So an example would be, I hope you're doing well. Or maybe you could say, I hope you had a nice weekend. So those would be opening small talk greetings that you might use when writing an email. After that, you again would put all of the information that you need to include in your email, the body. And then you would have some closing lines. So maybe you would say, I look forward to hearing from you. Or maybe you invite them to ask a question about what you've included in your email. So please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. Or again, you can end with some small talk. Have a great weekend. That is generally kind of a bit more of a casual closing line, but a good option if you do want to make a little bit of small talk, build a bit of relationship with your recipient. And then the closing greetings we have here, sincerely is the most formal. So if you wrote, Dear Dr. Miller, you might want to end with sincerely, and you would sign your name. So sincerely, Abby. Kind regards and all the best are two pretty typical closing greetings that are used throughout the business world. So you can use either one of those as well. They're a little bit more casual than sincerely. So here is an example of an email. So you can see at the top, number one is the subject line. You can see that I wrote the email, and the email is to Fatima, and I CC'd Crystal. So you can see that both are listed there. Hello, Fatima was my opening line. My opening greeting. And then my opening line, it was so nice meeting with you again yesterday. So that one is a little bit more casual because we've already met. And then you can see where I signed it, Abby. And then underneath is my email signature. So that includes my full name, my title, and my company. And then it has all of my contact information as well listed there. So that would be added to every email that I do send. And again, your company might have a template that you can use to include all of the information for an email. And then attachments are generally at the bottom, just like that. So any document that I want to attach, you could find there. So some tips you'll want to consider when you're writing an email. The main one is to use simple language. So business writing is clear and concise. Again, you want to judge your audience. If you're writing a coworker, it can be more casual and conversational. If you're writing a client, you want to be more formal. The next tip is to sign your email with your preferred name. So your email name might be different than what you go by. So if you remember from the last slide, my email name was Abigail, but I signed it as Abby. By signing as Abby, that lets the person who's responding know that they can call me Abby, since that is what I go by, and it's different than my full email name. Another thing you might want to consider is adding your gender pronoun to your email signature. So many Americans may not have ever seen your name before. They may not be aware if your name is a typically female name or a typical male name. So adding your pronoun could help save some embarrassment in the future. If we look at the previous slide, you can see in my email signature, next to my name, I've put my gender pronouns there. So you know that I go by she, hers, and hers. Again, that just can help save some embarrassment in the future. The next tip you want to consider is to avoid all caps. So all caps is using all capital letters, just like I've written here in all caps. In English, this generally means that you're shouting or angry. So you really shouldn't ever use all caps, but especially in business emails. You don't want to come across as angry. So just capitalize the first letter of your sentence or maybe an important name. Don't use all caps. And then when you're writing your subject lines, you want to make sure to write short, strong subject lines. So the subject line is the first text your reader sees of your email, and what you write in your subject line determines if and how quickly your email gets read. So you want to summarize the content of your email and maybe include any action you want your reader to take, but make sure to keep it short. Never start the actual message in the subject line. So don't say, "Hello, Dr. Gray, how are you?" in the subject line. That should always be put in the body, in the message portion of the email, and you should just write a summary in the subject line. After you've written your email, make sure to go through and edit for typos. So typos are typographical errors. So these are mistakes made in the typing process. Maybe you're typing and you accidentally hit a P instead of an L, and that would make your words spelled wrong. So you want to go back and reread your email to look for those typos. I recommend reading your message out loud. This way you're able to check for awkward phrasing that doesn't say exactly what you want it to say. A lot of email clients like Gmail include software such as spell check or Grammarly that will let you know if something is spelled wrong or doesn't make any sense. So look for those red lines under words, for example, to help you make sure your email and everything is spelled right and looks good. But some of these software may miss words that are spelled correctly, but have a different meaning than what you meant to say. So definitely make sure to watch out for those tricky English words that sound the same but have different spellings and meanings. So these are called homophones. So homophones, again, are words that are pronounced the same but have different meanings and usually different spellings. So here we've listed a few homophones that you can expect to run into, especially as you're writing an email. Unfortunately, there's a lot of homophones in English, so this is not all of them, but these are common ones that you might, again, you might use when you're writing an email. So if we look at do and do, perhaps your boss asked someone to volunteer for a project. You might respond to his email by saying, "I'll do it. When is it due?" Again, you want to go back and make sure you wrote the right do in the right place. So I'll do it. When is it due? When is the deadline? So make sure to use the right one. There, and there. This one is tricky, and a lot of native English speakers get this wrong. So if you're able to watch out for these and get this correct, it'll be very impressive and show how good your English skills are and how good you are at small details. So an example of a sentence is, "They're taking their chairs over there." So they are taking the chairs that they own over to a different location. So again, be very careful about when you're using which there. No and no. An example sentence of when you might use both is, "I'll ask my boss, but I know he's going to say no. He's not going to agree with me. I just know it." For and for. So someone might write, "We got a cake for Lisa's birthday. The party is at 4. So again, you'll want to make sure that you're writing 4 p.m. to make sure everyone knows that they're going at 4 p.m. for the party. We got a cake for Lisa's birthday at 4 p.m. To, and to. Much like there, and there, a lot of native English speakers will also get these wrong. So an example sentence you can expect is, "We've got 2 people going to the conference already, but I think Steve wanted to go too." So I think Steve also wanted to go. So make sure if you need to use 2 O's, it's for also. So I think Steve wanted to go too, TOO. Right and right. So Heather is right. We should write our own newsletter. Heather is correct. We should write our own newsletter. Hour and hour. So we'll have an hour at the conference for our presentation. So again, we'll have 60 minutes at the conference to do the presentation we've been working on. Make sure you're using the right hour. And then week and week. Our sales pitch is a bit weak. Next week, let's see what we can do to make it better. So our sales pitch isn't very good. It lacks strength. Let's see what we can do to make it better next week. So these ones are tricky and they won't be caught generally by spell check or by Grammarly. So that is why you need to go back and reread your emails carefully to try to catch these types of mistakes. Okay, I do want to pause once more for questions. Tammin, did we have any come in?
We do have a handful of questions that have come in about talking on the phone and email, but I do want to go back to a question about small talk that's also come in. So let's start there. How do you distinguish whether you need to answer the question, how are you doing?
That's a great question. So the example that I provided, if you're in a hallway, you're both walking towards each other, and someone says, "How are you?" Generally, you don't have to stop and turn and answer the question. If they keep walking, you don't need to worry about answering. If you're having more of a sit-down conversation, or you're at having drinks with a coworker and they say, "How are you?" That would maybe they would want a real response to that. But typically, especially if you meet even a stranger in an elevator, or you walk into a store, the person who's working there might say, "Hi, how are you?" They're not really expecting a response. They're mostly saying, they're mostly just saying hello. You might respond by saying, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm good." Again, something quick and something light and casual is typically the answer they're looking for. So really, a lot of times it's more of a quick answer, unless you're maybe sitting down with a friend and they are really looking at you and they say, how are you? How are you doing? Then they might want a real response to that question.
Great, thank you. On the topic of phone etiquette, what do you do if you can't understand someone on the phone?
Yeah, sometimes talking on the phone can be a little difficult, especially if you don't have a good connection. So if you're having trouble understanding someone, you're welcome to tell them so. So maybe you say, "I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time understanding you. Can you please repeat that?" So just being honest, and again, staying as polite as possible and saying, "Oh, I want to help you, but I'm not getting your full question. Can you try again?" Is generally the best way to do that.
Great, thank you. A question on email signatures. Is it appropriate to use your initials or a nickname, especially if you have perhaps a name that's hard for Americans to say or spell correctly?
Yes, I would say that it can be considered appropriate if that's what you want people to call you or to go by, as long as you're okay if they call you that name, then you can use that for your email signature. But if you prefer that they use your full name, you might want to make sure that that's what's written out. Sometimes you could maybe put pronunciation cues next to your name if you're afraid someone won't be able to pronounce your name. Sometimes that can be helpful if you write it out like Americans, English speakers would say it, then that might help them as well. But it's really what you're comfortable with, what your company and coworkers are comfortable with, is what you would want in your email signature.
And another question on the topic of emails. How can I help avoid making grammatical errors when writing an email?
So the first thing is to make sure your spell check is activated in your email settings. Again, most email clients like Gmail will do this automatically, but make sure it's working because that will help you catch a lot of mistakes. But again, it's going back and doing careful editing after you write your email that will help you make sure that they're written correctly. If you do make a mistake, you really shouldn't worry too much about it. A lot of emails are written pretty quickly, and even native speakers miss typos that they've made. So do your best and don't worry too much about it if you forget to catch one.
Thank you. And looks like there's one more question. What should I do if I accidentally copy someone on an email?
Yeah, so that one, It depends on when you catch yourself. So if you use Gmail at work and you notice the mistake as soon as you hit send, a lot of times Gmail will have the option to unsend or undo the first few seconds after you send an email. So if you notice it right away, you might be able to stop that email from being sent. If it's later that you notice that you've accidentally copied the wrong person, you might want to resend that email and take that person off and maybe just send an apology to everyone and say, you know, I'm sorry, I want to make sure everyone's copied correctly, so I'm resending this email. That way, any responses that come in, if someone hits reply all, won't go to that person you accidentally copied. After you've done that, you might just want to send a separate email to the person you accidentally copied and just say, you know, I'm sorry, please disregard that email, please ignore that email, that was on accident, that was a mistake.
Great, thank you.
Are those all the questions? Oh, sorry.
That's all of them so far.
Perfect. Okay, so that means that we can go ahead and move on to idioms. So idioms can be confusing to non-native speakers as usually the individual words together don't make sense. So they are understood figuratively and they're usually known culturally and vary based on each culture. So I have an example here. An example in English is it's raining cats and dogs. So again, if this had a literal meaning, it would mean that there were actual cats and dogs raining from the sky. We know that's not really happening, so it does have a figurative meaning. It means it's raining very heavily. So if someone says it's raining cats and dogs, it just means there's a lot of rain. Idioms can be hard because you do just need to familiarize yourself with them and use them frequently in order to understand them better. I am sorry to tell you that there are a lot of idioms in the business world in English. We are going to go through quite a few right now because familiarizing yourself with some of these idioms can help increase your understanding when you come to the United States to do an internship. Again, you might not remember all of these right away, but just hearing them and using them a lot will help you when you come to do your internship. Okay, so the first three we have. The first one is perfect because it means to begin or start. So kick off. I believe this references soccer. It does have a sports origin. When you start a soccer game, the ball is in the middle of the field. One team kicks it and it's the kickoff that starts the game. So in business as well, someone might use kickoff to start something. So your boss might say, Jan, can you kick off today's meeting with a summary of what we discussed last week? So can you start today's meeting, please? Show of hands, that's the next idiom we want to talk about. So a show of hands is a vote by which people actually raise their hands in the air in support of a proposal. So your boss might say, by a show of hands, who agrees with Mark's budget proposal? So if you agreed and you wanted to vote for Mark's budget proposal, you would put your hand in the air to vote yes. Housekeeping. Everyone knows what housekeeping is in your house. So it's just keeping your house clean, doing the dishes, vacuuming. But housekeeping in the business world can be used as kind of as an idiom. So it refers to tasks that must be done regularly to keep systems or company running smoothly and efficiently. So your supervisor in a meeting might say, a bit of housekeeping before we begin discussing the blueprints. Please make sure to send me your holiday PTO request by next week. So he needs to know who's going to be in the office over the holidays to make sure that projects keep getting done, that the office continues running. So that question isn't related to the actual work you're doing, but it is important to know to make sure that the company keeps running smoothly. So that's why it would be considered housekeeping. So the next idiom is brainstorm. So this is to produce an idea or problem solve together in a group. So brainstorming is really good because someone might have one idea and that would spark another idea in someone else. And then you can continue to build off that idea and come up with more and better ideas. So your boss might say in a meeting, any thoughts on how we can improve next year's sales? Let's brainstorm. So that means just let's think together and try to come up with ideas. Bring to the table. That means to provide a skill or offer a contribution to the group effort. So if someone wants Mark to join a project, he might ask, what does Mark bring to the table? What is he going to offer us? What skills does he have that will help us? Someone might also say, please welcome our new hire, Amanda. She has a lot of experience to bring to the table. So she's done this before. She has a lot of skills to offer us, a lot that she's bringing to our table. Learn the ropes. So this is to learn how a job is done. I believe this originated with sailboats. So when new sailors would come and join the crew, they would have to learn how to tie the ropes and how to change the ropes, to tie knots and change the ropes to keep the sails up and the boats moving. So they were learning the ropes just to learn how to do their job. So these days it can mean any job. So someone might say, it shouldn't take Amanda long to learn the ropes. Amanda, she has a lot of experience. She knows what she's doing. She can learn the job quickly, learn the ropes quickly. These 3 idioms are related to trains. So if you're in the middle of a meeting and you were about to say something, and as soon as you were about to say it, it left your mind, you can no longer remember what you were about to say. You might say, I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought. I can't remember what I was going to say. Let's say you're in the middle of a meeting and everyone starts talking about Jerry's cat and looking at pictures of Jerry's cat. That means you have gotten off track. So to get off track means to discuss something not related to the goal or purpose on the conversation. So your boss might say, while I enjoy hearing about Jerry's cat, we seem to have gotten off track. He might want to make sure you get back on track. So he might want to return the discussion to a topic relevant to the purpose of the conversation. So he might say, let's get back on track and discuss last quarter's sales figures. All good train idioms. The next one is a long shot. So this is something that is unlikely to happen, but worth trying for. So a long time ago, back in the day when people would shoot guns, they weren't very accurate from far away. So it would be a long shot, which most likely wouldn't hit the target. That's kind of where this originates. So now it's something that you want to try for, but probably it won't happen. So most likely Beyonce isn't going to come to your event, but maybe you know a friend of a friend of a friend who knows her, someone at her record label. You might say, it's a long shot, but I can ask my contact at the record label if he will give me the phone number for Beyonce's agent. Again, most likely it's not going to happen, but you might as well try. Thinking outside the box. So this just means to think creatively about new ideas rather than using traditional or expected ideas. So if you want something to be really good, to be really different than what you've done before, you might say, we really need to think outside of the box this year in order to top last year's event. So we need to do something not traditional, not expected, something entirely new. We need to think outside the box. Looking at the big picture. So that means to focus on the most important aspect of something and its long-term effects rather than the small details. So maybe you've made a proposal and someone is focusing on how expensive it is, but you're trying to tell them that it's more important to look at what this project will offer you in the long term. So you're telling them to look at the big picture. So I know this proposal seems expensive right now, but we need to look at the big picture and focus on where our organization will be in the future if we don't implement it. So you want to focus on the long term rather than really small details. Crunch the numbers. So these 3 idioms, all 3 of them have to do with numbers and finances, oftentimes. So crunch the numbers is to do calculations and analyze the data, especially as it relates to money and budgets. So as a boss might say, Lisa's idea is great, but we'll need to crunch the numbers to see if it's in budget for this project. So we need to do calculations to see if we can afford it. The bottom line. So this is the final total of an account balance, typically as it relates to a company's earnings or profits. So your CEO is most concerned about his profits and how much something will cost him and how much it will cost him to do and how much he'll get from it. So he might say, great, I love this proposal, but how will it affect our bottom line? How much money will it bring in for us? And then a ballpark figure. So this is a rough estimate, and typically it refers to money and numbers. So this is if you don't know the exact cost of something, but you know that it'll cost closer to $50,000 than to $10,000. Someone might say to you, I know you don't know exactly how much it will cost, but can you give me a ballpark? Can you give me an estimate? So you would say, it's going to cost around $50,000. That way the person knows that they should plan for $50,000 rather than $10,000, which really might affect their budget. This one, I believe, is a baseball reference. So a baseball park diamond, when there were a big audience, commentators used to estimate the number of people in attendance just by looking around. So they would give a rough estimate of how many people there were just by looking around the ballpark. So we have on the back burner. So this is something that is low priority that you still want to consider, but you need to put it on hold to be developed later. So we really need to focus on our sales numbers right now. Let's put the website upgrades on the back burner. You want to do it in the future, but you don't have enough time, enough resources to do it at this moment. So you put it on the back burner to be considered later. This is, for example, like when you're cooking, you're on a stovetop, anything on the back burner is typically something you don't have to pay very much attention to. So, something maybe that's just boiling that you don't need to do anything with, while the things on the front burner are the things that you're actually stirring and watching. So low priority and high priority are the differences. Back burner is low priority. To cut corners. So this is to do something in the easiest, cheapest, and quickest way possible. And typically it is a negative thing. So it has a negative connotation because it often means that you're neglecting something important. So if you want to make sure that you're the best at something and that you're offering the best products, the most reliable product, you might say, we can't afford to cut corners on this. We can't be cheap about this. We need to be the most reliable in the industry. We need to go the full way, do everything we can do to make sure it's the best. Play by the book. So this is to follow the rules and regulations exactly. So let's say you go to a boss with a great idea. You've thought outside of the box and you have this great idea, but you're going to need an exception to one of your company's rules. You might not want to go to Thomas because the guess is that Thomas won't approve that exception because he plays by the book. He follows the rules exactly and never says yes to any exceptions. To get the ball rolling means to begin a project. So your boss might say, Leslie, let's get the ball rolling on this by contacting Damien on the development team. So he's just saying, let's start this project. The first thing we need to do is contact Damien. To be up to speed is to have the latest information on a topic. So your boss might say, Tom, set a meeting with Ron to get him up to speed on this project. So let's make sure, Ron is joining the project in the middle of it. He needs to make sure that he has all of the information to be up to speed and to make sure he can continue with the rest of the team working on the project. Give the green light. This is like when you're driving. When you get a red light, you have to stop. When you get a green light, it means that you can go. So to give the green light is to grant permission to move forward with something. So your coworker might say, Robert gave me the green light on the marketing project so we can start to draw up plans. So he gave me the go ahead. We can go ahead and move forward. We got permission. On the same page. This is to have the same understanding as someone else to agree. So if you're working on a team, you might say, before we begin the next phase of this project, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So I want to make sure that we all agree, we all understand what needs to happen now. Keep in the loop. Make sure someone has the latest information and is involved. So your boss might want you to take the lead on a project. She might say, you take the lead on this, but keep me in the loop. That means she wants regular updates. She wants to know how the project is progressing, even though she's not the one actually working actively on the project. She just wants to be kept in the loop, kept informed. Touch base and covered all the bases. So these are baseball references again. So in baseball, if you don't know it well, there are 4 bases on the ground and someone has to run and touch every base in order to get a point. So touch base means to make contact or reconnect with someone briefly. So if you want an update, you might on a project, you might say, I wanted to touch base with you to see if you'd heard from finance about those budget cuts. So you wanted to get a quick update from them. Covered all the bases means to do everything necessary to make sure something is successful. So in baseball, the team on defense has to have a man standing next to every base to try to get the other team out, to try to stop them from getting a point. So they're doing everything they need to do to make sure they're successful and that they win by covering all the bases. So someone on your team might say, have we covered all the bases? Did you finalize the draft and contact the printers? Have we done everything we need to do to make sure this project succeeds? Miss the mark. This means to fail to achieve the desired outcome. So perhaps you gave a presentation and it didn't go so well. You would have missed the mark. So an example, unfortunately, Ben's presentation yesterday missed the mark. The executives didn't go for it. So he's going to need to try again. In a nutshell means to explain something in the shortest, most efficient way possible. So maybe someone asked you about the presentation. Instead of giving them all the details about what went well, what went wrong, you might say, in a nutshell, not well. So the end result was that they didn't go for it, so it didn't go well. So you tell them in a nutshell, not well. Red tape. These are official rules and processes that seem unnecessary or excessive and delay results. So a long time ago, various official government and legal documents used to be bound with physical red tape. So these days it often includes tasks like filling out paperwork, obtaining licensees, or having multiple people or committees approve a decision before it can move forward. So anything that usually is done through the government is often considered red tape because there's a lot of excessive bureaucracy and it makes things slower. So the library project has been delayed due to the red tape of building permissions. And then back to square one and back to the drawing board, both mean to start over, usually after one attempt has failed. So you might say, you know, since they didn't like our proposal, we're back to square one. We need to try again. The same for back to the drawing board. So maybe you'll say, we'll have to come up with a new plan. Let's get back to the drawing board. You know, we have to go try again, start at the beginning. Start from scratch also means to start at the very beginning when nothing has been done. So a long time ago, if people were running a race, they would scratch a mark in the ground, and that's from where everyone would start, behind the scratch in the ground. So that's starting at the very beginning. When you're baking, if you bake something from scratch, that means that you start with the flour and the sugar and the eggs, and you mix them all together yourself instead of buying a pre-bought mix. So starting from scratch in the business world means you start where nothing has been done from the very beginning. So this project is really different from the ones we've done before. We'll need to start from scratch. And then the last three idioms we have are perfect because they do mean to bring to a close. So wrap up means to bring to a close. We've got about 5 minutes left. It looks like we're actually at 3 right now. So we need to wrap up this presentation as we've hit our hour. Call it a day means to stop working. So a lot of times this is used if your boss lets you go home early. So maybe it's an hour before close, but he said, you know, we've already done a lot today. Let's call it a day. You all can go home early. We'll see you tomorrow. So it's great when you hear that. And then happy hour. This is a time when a bar or restaurant offers discounts on drinks and food. So a lot of times your coworkers will say, hey, we're going to happy hour after work. Would you like to join? That just means they're going to go to a bar typically or a restaurant, maybe get a drink or two to have some casual socialization after work. Even if you don't drink alcohol, it would still be great to go. You can get maybe some food or a soda and just, you know, socialize with your coworkers, bond with them over happy hour. So again, the use of idioms can make understanding difficult, especially if you don't speak English natively, but don't be afraid to speak up if you don't understand something. Your coworkers and supervisors will most likely be more than happy to clarify for you and answer any questions you might have. And it can lead to a lot of less misunderstanding in the future if you just ask for clarification if you don't understand. So that brings us to the end of this presentation. Tammin, did we have any final questions come in about idioms?
I want to squeeze in one last question, but if you do have any other questions, feel free to contact us on any of these social media or email links. But what to do if we can't find the right business terminology to explain I'm sorry, what can I do if I can't find the right business terminology to explain myself?
Yeah, I think again, you just want to try as hard as possible, do your best. Your coworkers and supervisors, they'll understand that you're still learning English. You're only an intern, so they'll definitely have a lot of grace with you, and will do all they can to help you understand better. So again, just try as hard as you can, and maybe do a little bit of research before you come over again about idioms and maybe just about acronyms that you can expect to see in your industry.
One idiom I want to share that came into the chat box is the Czech version of raining cats and dogs is it's falling wheelbarrows. So I thought that was a nice anecdote I wanted to share.
Oh, that's great. Okay, well, I think those were all the questions we have time for right now. But if you do think of any, like Tammin said, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to answer them. And we will send out this presentation so you can get the text of all of the slides. Thank you again so much for joining us today. If you should be on the lookout for our next webinar. We are going to continue this series over the next couple of months. So we hope that you will be able to join us again. All right, everyone, have a good afternoon. Thank you.